If you think inflation is stealing your money, wait till you hear about these people who managed to steal billions of dollars and shake the markets to its core. I'll be exploring some of the most infamous financial crimes in history. And I'll be starting off with a crime that costed people a measly $200 million. Jordan Belfort. If that name sounds familiar to you, it's probably because this man's story was covered quite extensively through the book and movie The Wolf of Wall Street. Ignoring some of the other weird shit that happened in the movie, Mr. Belfort here, through his firm Stratton would commit some pretty illegal stuff, including money laundering, securities fraud, and one of the largest pump and dump schemes ever. A pump and dump scheme basically involves deceiving and manipulating investors through over-exaggerated or just plain false information to get them to buy a security and in turn pushing up the price of the stock, which they'll be able to profit off and dump their shares once the position moves up. Which is exactly what Jordan and his firm would do in the 90s. You see, Jordan and his team specialized in the art of sales and developed a pretty sneaky method to draw in the investors' trust and later convince them to buy and invest in shitty penny stocks. Using something called the Kodak pitch, they would first talk about a credible and safe blue chip stock, then after developing trust with an investor, they would then introduce a risky penny stock. The reason why these stockbrokers like selling penny stocks to these investors and their clients is because the commission was much higher than the less risky blue chip stock. And with the highly competitive culture and environment that a firm like Stratton would breed, you can only imagine the crap these stockbrokers would say to get them to buy a security. Which, by the way, is kind of illegal. Securities fraud and everything. If you thought these influencers pump and dumps were bad, imagine what you can do when you have a corporation worth hundreds of millions of dollars and a team of 1,000 stockbrokers behind you. Well, you would have about $200 million swindled from over 1,000 investors. And later the incarceration of everyone associated with the whole scheme, including Belfort himself, in 1999.
Was all this legal? Absolutely fucking not.
This next crime is known as the largest bank heist in history. And it wouldn't be your normal everyday bank robbery, because this one was executed by the Iraqi dictator himself, Saddam Hussein. On March 2003, as tension between Iraq and the US was reaching its breaking point, Saddam would send 3 trucks led by his son Qusay Hussein, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, to secure $920 million from Iraq's central bank located in Baghdad. He also included a handwritten note written by himself to ask the bank very politely to hand over the money. But this may have been the most anticlimactic bank heist in history, which may be due to the fact that Saddam was the dictator of Iraq at the time, which would also give him a lot of control and influence over the assets of the country. So the bank workers would really have no choice but to hand over all the money. Eventually, throughout the United States invasion of Iraq, they would end up finding $650 million of the money. But the remaining $350 million of it has still not been found till this day. Moral of the story, if you want to make a quick $1 billion from your local bank, become a dictator. Now we're moving on to probably one of the largest corporate scandals of all time, known as the Enron scandal. Enron was a very well-known and highly respected company back in the 90s. Being led by their CEO Kenneth Lay, the company focused on trading and supplying energy, which is a deregulated market that allows corporations to partake in betting on energy prices. This also created an environment of low government oversight. The first signs of the company's eventual downfall was when it switched its accounting method to the mark-to-market accounting method, which was approved by the SEC in 1992. But the thing with this accounting method was that it focused on measuring the fair value things rather than the actual value and costs. This allowed Enron to over-exaggerate their profit reports and even hide some of their losses, making the company look better than it actually did. One of the company's sus accounting techniques that helped them hide some of their losses was through transferring assets that didn't perform how they wanted to a third-party private company. They also used a special purpose entity to further hide away negative account information and debt from the public. Enron would exchange their growing stock for cash from the SPV, and the SPV would use that stock to hedge against an Enron asset, theoretically reducing risk. But Enron kind of assumed that their stock price would go up forever. And the thing about these SPVs were that they were entirely funded by Enron stock. So when Enron stock did tank, it just became a double whammy. On top of all of this accounting and securities fraud, top executives of the company were also charged with counts of embezzlement, money laundering, wire fraud, and all the fucking above. A company that was once heralded as one of the largest companies in America, in just about 2 years would go from a peak stock value of $90.50 in 2000 to going bankrupt and closing at 26 cents in 2001. This would lose shareholders about $74 billion. and the CEO, Jeff Skilling, getting 24 years in prison, which he would serve 12 years of, while Kenneth Lay, on the other hand, was also found guilty and was looking at a potential 45 years in prison, but would later die of a heart attack in 2006, just 3 months before his sentencing. Now on to probably the most infamous and largest financial crime of all time, done primarily by one man, Bernie Madoff. This man, Bernie Madoff, implemented the world's largest Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme is when you pay investors that invest money into your firm, your hedge fund, money that you collect from new investors that join later, making it seem like to your existing investors that your strategies are working and making them money, which is far from the case. The Ponzi scheme was actually named after another scammer who went by the name of Charles Ponzi back in the early 1900s. But that guy's operation doesn't even compare to the amount of money Bernie would con out of the public. $65 billion. This would be about how much Madoff would swindle away from his clients and investors. And this was kind of how he did it. He would first establish a firm, the Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities LLC, and promote it as a highly exclusive and consistently profitable firm for investors. He would tell investors that he used an investment strategy called the split strike conversion, a strategy that involved S&P 100 stock options, and would explain to them that the strategy produces high returns. Yeah, that's bullshit. He would validate this through using the historical performance of some of the top performing stocks at the time. But since the strategy was actually kind of ass, when investors asked to cash out, Madoff would pay them through the capital he generated from new clients, instead of the ones from the actual strategy. I mean, if there were any in the first place. This Ponzi scheme would somehow last more than 2 decades and would only be found out during the 2008 subprime mortgage crash, in which many of the firm's clients looked towards withdrawing and cashing out their funds at the same time. All of this withdrawing brought to light the dark secret behind Bernie's firm, and later on December 10th, 2008, he would confess his whole illegal operation scheme to his kids, and they themselves would turn him in. What happened to family first? Come on now. Vin Diesel would be so mad.
You don't turn your back on family.
He owed about 4,800 clients billions of dollars. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison and was forced to forfeit $170 billion of assets. Damn. Decades of grinding and developing a solid reputation in the financial industry, down the drain. Just like that. Gone. I believe the reason why Bernie Madoff's scheme may have been so successful compared to his predecessors is most likely due to the fact that he had established for himself high amounts of credibility in the financial world. From being one of the industry's trailblazers in electronic trading to being the chair of NASDAQ in the 90s. All of this probably made it easier for investors to trust him with their money, and maybe even helped put up a wall that covered many of the firm's flaws. All 4 of these are examples of how people throughout history corrupted and swindled their way to the top of the world stage and the most elite. And if I'm being blunt, there are definitely still entities and corporations out there cheating their way to the top. But one thing we can take from all 4 of these stories is that eventually the truth will come out, either now or in the future, especially with the advent of technology and lessons from the past. But we should still be cautious out there, boys, and learning about these things definitely help, because knowledge is truly